We get asked very frequently, how is it that Nuliv is able to create multiple different ingredients from the same source materials, astragalus and Panax ginseng? So today, let's talk about how Nuliv takes the same sources and creates multiple different ingredients by using different constituents. So if you looked at any of Nuliv's ingredients over the last few different years, you'll see, for instance, AstraGin, astragalus root, and Panax ginseng. You'll also see that in Senactiv, Panax ginseng with other additives. If you look at their InnoSlim, astragalus root with Panax ginseng. Even Astrion, which isn't a sports nutrition ingredient, but a health and beauty ingredient, astragalus root. So on a recent call with Nuliv, I had the opportunity to sit down with one of their research and development directors and learn all about how they take the same different sources, astragalus and Panax ginseng, and extract different compounds and constituents from within those herbs and botanicals and create multiple different ingredients with vastly different effects. The answer comes down to various different Astragalosides and Ginsenosides. We'll call these ASTs and GSs. Now, I promise you, we're going to go through a little bit of science here, and this might get a little bit complicated, but on the other end of this, you'll leave with knowing a lot about the naturally occurring constituents within these two ingredients and how they can be manipulated in different ratios to give you desired effects, like InnoSlim slowing down sugar intake within the intestines, while also other versions of it being able to increase sugar intake. So let's jump in and talk about what ASTs and GSs actually are. Astragalosides themselves are actually triterpenoid saponins. Now, you've heard of saponins before, things like tribulus and stuff like that. But in short, these triterpenoid saponins are bioactive compounds that are found exclusively in plants. Now, some of these are in higher amounts within some plants, and those have a lot of value. In this case, astragalus is one of those plants that has a high amount of them, containing roughly 80% of its total saponins are triterpenoids. Now, it does include 5 different astragalosides, named astragaloside 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but mostly astragaloside number 4 is really what we're talking about here. That's what you'll see most often in these Nuliv compounds. It's the most abundant, and it also seems to have the most large effects on the human body, so we see that most often being used. Now, as always, I'm going to note here that I have been using our blog post as a bit of an outline because it takes us through the course of these different studies over the years and what it's being used. So if you want to learn about what I'm talking about, you are more of a reader, you can definitely go over to blog.priceplow.com and read it there. Some of the astragaloside number 4 displayed effects were improved cardiac function, encouraged collagen synthesis and protection against collagen degradation, a hepaprotective agent, reduction of symptoms of metabolic dysfunctions, and neuroprotective effects. Some of these should start to sound familiar if you're familiar with Nuliv's offered compounds. Now, ginsenosides are the main bioactive constituent found within ginseng. These are also triterpenoid saponins, very similar in nature to astragalosides. But in this case, there's actually over 100 different ginsenosides that have been identified. And they've actually been categorized into a few different sections here. And while this isn't super important for the knowledge for the product, there's 3 categories, and the 2 that are most often used in Nuliv ingredients are 2 of the 3. There's panaxadiol, which is RB1, RB2, RD, RG3, and RH2. Panaxatriol, which is RE, RG1, RG2, and RH1, and the oleanolic group, which are larger compounds. They're much more rare to be found, and it's not really important for this topic here, but it is the other version of these ginsenosides. Most often in Nuliv, you're going to see the RB1 and the RG1. Now, these are named these different R and a letter for a very specific reason. They're named RX, where X is a letter between A and S, and the letters actually represent the polarity of the molecule, whereas the least polar being A, the most being S. At the end of the day, these are all different versions of ginsenosides, and they're used to fight inflammatory cytokines. Now, much of what Nuliv does here to create different effects is use different ratios of RB1 and RG1 with or without the astragaloside number 4. So this is where it gets kind of sciencey, and this is kind of the most intense part of this. RB1 and RG1, they're very similar in some cases, and in some cases they're actually like really, really similar, but in other cases they couldn't be further apart. A lot of this is going to have to do with things like AMPK and mTOR, activation of one or the other. Now, AMPK, if you watch some of our content or read, you'll know that AMP is an activated protein kinase. AMPK is a major enzyme used by the body to regulate cellular energy, facilitating the conversion of AMP to ATP when the need for energy arises. Now, AMPK is a catalyst in the activation of catabolic pathways. So sometimes you'll hear us talking about metabolic dysfunction, glucose uptake, fatty acid oxidation. It's really important for those. But it's also known for the suppression of some anabolic pathways, like glycogen and lipid synthesis, which is also important because that's why some people don't like GDAs. But operating as the key that unlocks metabolic functioning, AMPK has very wide-reaching effects. Signals multiple enzymes, proteins, and other compounds when activated. And through this is how RB1 and RG1 can modulate tons of different things in the body. The phosphorylation of AMPK triggers a lot of downstream effects, affecting things all the way from, here's a couple different ones. Acetyl-CoA carboxylase, which controls fatty acid metabolism. GLUT4, GLUT4, a glucose transporter that plays a central role in glucose homeostasis. You've heard that one often if you've heard me talk about InnoSlim. SGLT1, a sodium-dependent glucose transporter that mediates glucose uptake in the small intestine. Again, InnoSlim. Adiponectin and leptin. The former is an adipokine integral in fatty acid oxidation and also glucose uptake. The latter is a hormone that controls satiation and is super important for dieting. We talk about this a lot with cheat meals, satiation, happiness when eating, and the power of actual refeeds and releasing calories at times. Also, the mTOR pathway. We talked about suppression of anabolic pathways. It does have an effect on mTOR, whether that's moving the needle up or down. Super important for people who are dieting or trying to gain lean mass. AMPK also expresses super anti-inflammatory properties in a lot of different areas. If you heard us talk about Senactiv, that's super, super important to that discussion. So there are different areas where RG1, RB1 do a lot of those different things listed there. Things that they do together, however, both activate AMPK. They both have anti-inflammatory properties. They both improve symptoms of metabolic dysfunction. Specifically, RB1 was found in a study in 2001 to reduce food intake and body fat while increasing glucose tolerance and energy expenditure, which is pretty powerful. Alternatively, RG1 in 2019 in a study actually showed to increase glucose uptake in the intestines, supporting a study in 2012 where RG1 actually increased glucose uptake in insulin-resistant mycocytes by raising GLUT4 activity, again, helping out insulin-resistant participants by increasing their insulin sensitivity. And while both of them do have anti-inflammatory properties, they're different on their SGLT1 activity. In 2017, researchers found that the protopanaxatriol Ginsenosides, RG1, inhibits SGLT1, effectively reducing glucose uptake in the intestines, which is important because we see that in InnoSlim, reducing glucose uptake in the intestines and slowing down the absorption to slightly make it a little bit easier on the body, absorbing sugar slower. In 2007, RG1 reduced glucose uptake by 70% through SGLT1 inhibition. But these researchers also tested a compound CK, which is a metabolite of the protopanaxadiol Ginsenosides, which is similar to RB1. And they found that that metabolite enhanced glucose transport by 50%. And so that discrepancy has kind of a huge play on what's different between RB1 and RG1 and how you use them in combination. But that's not to say that RB1 isn't important for insulin sensitivity as well. Instead of slowing down glucose uptake in the intestine, it actually was found to have a 43% increase in glucose uptake in muscle cells. So instead of slowing down sugar intake in the intestines, it picked it up quickly and got it into the muscle cell. For some people, in my opinion, that actually could be more important if you're an athlete or someone who's trying to use the sugar instead of trying to help the body deal with a larger amount of sugar and use it slower, use it quicker so you can utilize it as energy. So both these Ginsenosides help out with insulin sensitivity, but through different ways. One through SGLT1, one through GLUT4. So what does this mean for all the different ingredients? Well, when you take all that information and then look at the ingredients, you can kind of tell which one's using which. For instance, AstraGin relies heavily on Astragaloside 4 to increase ingredient absorption. By decreasing inflammatory cytokines, raising ATP production, and increasing active transport activity, AstraGin can improve the absorption of multiple different ingredients and lower the inflammation in intestinal walls. Now, InnoSlim relies a little bit more on the panic soda ginseng, really leveraging the Ginsenosides for the increased insulin sensitivity, improved blood sugar, and AMPK stimulation. You can see this in one of the studies that Nuliv performed with InnoSlim. They added InnoSlim to multiple participants' lives with no other changes to training, diet, or any of that stuff. They increased AMPK, GLUT4, ACCP, adiponectin, and leptin, as well as total energy expenditure. Ultimately, all of these things facilitated better body composition, loss of weight and fat, and lowered actual food intake. I've seen this myself in my usage of InnoSlim. I remember a few times where I threw it into a stack, not realizing the changes that it would actually have pretty quickly on my blood sugar. And at the time, I was actually tracking my blood sugar pretty quickly, and I saw noticeable changes on a daily basis that I did not expect, large drops in fasted blood sugar levels. Senactiv, who we see in a lot of different products now, actually uses the Ginsenosides along a different ingredient, not Astragaloside, Rosa Roxburghi, which is a senolytic ingredient that helps with getting rid of old cells. But we see a lot of really great sports nutrition effects with this alongside the Ginsenosides because of the anti-inflammatory roles that they play. Increases in energy production, improved exercise performance, and improved recovery especially are huge claims from that. Lastly, Astrion, which we've seen in Ghost Glow, uses the Astragalosides but no Ginsenosides. It's a skin health boosting ingredient, which we saw in one of the first claims from Astragaloside, number 4. Especially using AST4's protection against ultraviolet radiation. It helps deal with the inflammation from UV rays as well as cytotoxicity. So thus encouraging the activity of pro-collagen and delaying the breakdown of collagen itself. As a whole, we're never going to see Nuliv actually take these ingredients and make them completely transparent. RB1, RG1 are expensive to get standards of, and the actual ratios of them are obviously proprietary for good reason. This isn't a situation where a company's covering up how much caffeine they're using. This is a super well studied and fine-tuned ingredient with these different ratios of these ingredients. That being said, we're huge fans of Nuliv. They bring out some really cool ingredients, and they've done a lot to help us with not just metabolic health, but also gut health, skin health, sports performance, and a lot of other things. I hope this was helpful for anyone who has any questions about how Nuliv ingredients actually work, because I was curious about them, and I know that I've had a lot of other, not even just consumers, but actual industry insiders ask, what's up with these ingredients? They're all using the same sources. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I keep up with the team at Nuliv, and anything that I can't answer, I could send over to them as well. I do say any of this stuff that we're talking about here, I did get for free. We do have a business affiliate relationship with Nuliv Sciences, so that all has to be said. As always, guys, I really appreciate making this far in the video, and have a great day.
Welcome to PricePlow.